Hello and welcome to my origami tutorial on the Kawasaki rose with stem and leaf all from one piece of paper. This is my initial attempt at the simplified Kawasaki rose with the stem. This was my first attempt at the Kawasaki rose and stem, but using the full Kawasaki model. Paper was a little thick, so for the final model I went with very thin drafting paper, which has its own issues. So we will start with that. I did not fold it out of a dollar bill, obviously. It would be hard to record that by itself. So you want a 3x7 sheet of paper, 3x7, same proportions as the dollar bill. Some important notes: I'm not going to show you how to fold the crease pattern, but I am going to make some important notes about it. Looking at the crease pattern for the rose, the initial crease pattern for the rose with stem, folded out of the dollar bill, you'll notice on the right side, which is the 4x3 section, that my right side is the opposite. So where this says it's a mountain fold, mine is a valley fold. This is not a valley fold, this is a mountain fold, so just reverse it. For the left side, using Joseph Wu's Kawasaki rose, that there's also a link for, the left side is folded as if this side were color. So looking at his, if I rotate it just a little, you can almost ignore this while folding the initial creases and say this is the color side. So step one involves folding to the diagonal here and folding to the diagonal here, and then creasing and folding the rest of the pre-creases. Try not to skip any of those steps because almost all of them are important, and make sure that a majority of your creases go through very, very crisply, especially if you're using drafting paper. It was not as fun to fold as I thought it would be. Once you have those, the first step I found it easiest to do. You'll notice possibly that there are extra creases here and here, and that's just from me folding the stem in half. I've unfolded the model so I can record this. So initially I'm going to collapse the stem. I apologize for the rustling. That's another reason why I probably shouldn't have used the tracing drafting paper. That is the stem collapsed, and I'm going to fold it up and behind. And the rest of this folds exactly like a Kawasaki rose, so if this video isn't quite up to par, you can certainly Google the other many Kawasaki rose models, and then come back to this one for tips on dealing with the stem. I usually start by flipping over and doing the collapse twist. So I note that I make this crease go all the way through the extra layers, being very crisp about that fold. Come up and start the twist. A lot of times people find it easier to do this, fold the square in half, fold a layer to either side, then open the model back up. If you folded your neat folds crisp enough, they'll collapse on their own. At this point, we have the spiral complete. A few checks to make. The stem is on the top, and my spiral is going counterclockwise. Also, you'll notice underneath each layer, the valley fold that runs here runs through the center of the Nike check mark. You can kind of see the Nike check mark there, or nearly the center. It runs through one of the points. So that's a good check, because once you get off with this, it makes it very hard to collapse. Next, we flip it back over, and I pull up some of these layers, and I begin to forcibly collapse it. Manhandling it, not necessarily the worst idea. Once I get to about here, There are 3 radial folds that you made 4 triplets of. Looking from this direction, there's a valley fold, and a mountain fold. It's kind of hard to see those. There's the valley, and the mountain. And the middle fold is the one I am folding now to help with the collapsing. Most of this is going to be done probably in the air because the model is obviously not flat. And once you get that model nice and tight, making sure that where the extra stem layers are, you kind of force some curve into them while you can. I'm going to loosen up a few layers in here, neaten up a few things, and then I'm going to go back and fold the Nike check marks with their associated layer changes. So there's the Nike fold. There's a second. Be very careful with the corners because later it makes it a little more difficult if it's not a crisp corner. There's 3. And there's 4. And I like to crinkle it all back up, make sure it's nice and compact. And at this point, I know, kind of silly, but I like to fold the leaf up and then fold the stem in half, reverse folding the stem to the outside. So another attempt. Stem is up towards the rose. Stem starts to fold in half, reverse fold the leaf out, and then you're going to follow that up into the rose, pinch it up against as far as it'll go. So it looks like that from the underside. Probably could have done this sooner, but I always forget. And then fold it to the outside. That way it's out of the way for the completion of the model. Okay, so there's our stem sticking out the side of the rose. And now to do the twist base, which I have never been particularly good at, so bear with me. I'm going to start with the rather thick layer, and there's one of the valley folds, and on the back the associated mountain fold, and I'm going to fold both of them at the same time. And earlier, at step, looking at the Kawasaki model, this is step 25 in his model. The pre-crease should have been around step 14. So those are the folds that you're going back over, if that helps. I am sort of inside reverse folding that whole layer. And then I'm going to go counterclockwise and do the next one. Doesn't really matter, but I find clockwise works better than counterclockwise works better than clockwise, excuse me. So that's 3 done. And one more. Rustle, 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 rustle. So now we have a pinwheel on the bottom of our rose. Now if you're using rather stiff paper, you could probably stop here, and that's actually what I recommend. Unfortunately, with this really thin paper, it just doesn't look quite up to par. So I'm going to do the next step, which I believe is step 26. Yes, where he outside reverse folds, and I usually rip my model. So I'm going to start with not the thick layer. I'm going to start one clockwise of it, and outside reverse fold. And then I'm going to do the thick layer to hold it in place. Outside reverse fold. Notice the triangle lines up with the previous triangle, or at least half of it. And then the next one, outside reverse fold. That's 3 done. And the last one, which is usually where I either take my model back apart or rip it out. And kind of pull everything together so we have a nice square base. Now, you may notice the stem does not come out the bottom. The stem comes out the side, which looks rather silly. You can force the layer, the stem, around and out the bottom, but with this very thin paper, it usually just makes the rose pop back apart, so I'm not going to do that. You're more than welcome to. The rest of the model is just shaping. There are plenty of videos on how to do that. Other than that, for the stem, I usually fold one layer out from the underside, and then fold a layer in, and then kind of round it off into something that you would imagine being a rose leaf. Now, again, the downside of using thin paper, you can see all those layers, so unless you do something rather cool, it may not look quite as nice as you're expecting. So that is the finished rose model, unless you want to force the stem down at the bottom, in which case, good luck. Thank you, and if you have any questions, feel free to reply.